My life, once so ordinary, became a series of joyless and anxious days ever since the rain started taking people away. At first, it seemed like just a coincidence, a strange and absurd figment of imagination. But with each new case, a dreadful realization gradually took hold of our minds, spreading unease and terror. Every rainy day, we prayed that no one would disappear. None of us dared to think that we might suffer the same fate. It all began with little Abby, the daughter of Mrs. McCall. Her mother, holding the girl's hand, was hurrying home when the rain suddenly began. In her haste to grab an umbrella, Mrs. McCall let go of Abby's hand for a moment. That moment was enough. Abby managed to let out a short, piercing scream before vanishing as if she had never existed. Her mother turned to catch the girl, but in that moment her daughter had been wiped off the face of the earth. Abby's disappearance was the first in a series of vanishings that plunged our town into fear. With every new rainfall, people kept disappearing, and soon a pattern was noticed. One person would vanish during regular rain, 2 during a downpour, and 3 when a thunderstorm hit. These disappearances quickly turned into a nightmare that gripped the town in an iron vise of fear. My brother Adam became obsessed with these disappearances. While the rest of us, including myself, clung to the familiar and tried to avoid the rain at all costs, he began studying these strange cases with the persistence of a maniac. He filled his notebooks with notes and hypotheses, and his room began to resemble a conspiracy theorist's headquarters, covered with maps of the town, photos of the missing, and lists of rainy dates. The comfort we tried to find in the familiar became for him a hazy premonition of the truth. I didn't share his enthusiasm and tried to stay away from his theories, which grew increasingly insane and dark. One early morning, when the rain outside pounded loudly on the roof, I woke up to find Adam shaking my shoulder. A cold fear gripped me when I saw the feverish excitement in his eyes and the strange smile on his lips. He was dressed in a coat and boots, as if he were about to go outside, even though a storm raged beyond the window. "Get up." "I found what I've been looking for," he exclaimed excitedly, giving me no time to comprehend. I looked at him through a sleepy haze, not understanding what was happening. He dragged me to the front door, not giving me a moment to think. "Adam, what are you doing?" I asked, feeling a cold knot of fear form in my stomach. But he had already opened the door, and cold raindrops rushed into the house like thousands of tiny needles piercing the skin. I grabbed his hand, but he pulled away, smiling like a madman. "I found it," he shouted, his voice rising above the sound of the rain, and ran outside despite my desperate attempts to stop him. His figure began to dissolve in the watery curtain, but I could still see him standing in place, as if waiting for someone. I couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed like madness, but curiosity and horror drove me closer. Suddenly, I noticed a tall figure emerging from the rain. It was indistinct, as if it was made of water itself, with droplets merging to form something resembling a human shape. The figure wore a blue coat, although it seemed the coat was woven from the rain itself. It slowly approached Adam, who stood still, as if hypnotized. I wanted to scream, to warn him, but the words stuck in my throat. Adam turned to me, his eyes ablaze with a crazy fire, and a mad smile spread across his face. "I found it," he shouted before the figure in the blue coat reached out to him and embraced him. I stood, frozen in horror, unable to believe my eyes. In an instant, Adam vanished as if he had never existed. The figure also dissolved into the air, leaving me alone under the pouring rain. I stood there in a daze, unable to move or even scream. The rain kept falling on me, but I no longer felt it. Fear and pain lost all meaning in that moment when I realized that Adam was never coming back. After Adam's disappearance, I became obsessed. I continued his work as if I could find some solace in it, but the answers eluded me like water slipping through my fingers. I studied every case, every disappearance, hoping to understand what exactly was taking people. But each new day brought only more questions. One night, as I sat in the kitchen surrounded by notes and newspaper clippings, I suddenly heard the sound of rain. It started slowly, clumsily tapping on the roof. I shuddered at the familiar sound but couldn't tear myself away from my thoughts. It seemed to me that the answer was somewhere close, that I just needed to understand how to save the others. the sounds of rain grew louder, and I realized a real downpour was beginning outside. The thought crossed my mind, someone is going to disappear now. I stood up, pushing the chair away, and approached the window. The rain was falling in sheets, turning the world outside into a vague, blurred picture. I stared into this dark mass, hoping to see something that could explain what was happening. Suddenly, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. My hand trembled as I tried to focus on it. A tall figure in a blue coat stood in the distance, almost blending in with the rain, but I knew for sure that it was there. It stood and looked directly at me. Paralyzing fear seized me. I stepped back, barely holding back a scream, as I saw the figure begin to move closer. It moved slowly, but deliberately, like a predator approaching its prey. I couldn't believe this was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay in place. I had to run. I rushed to the door, opened it, and ran down the stairs, feeling the cold rain lash at my face and body. The figure kept approaching, its steps slow but steady. I didn't know where I was running, but I knew one thing: I had to get away, had to hide. I ran without looking back, feeling the fear gnawing at my consciousness like a beast. Suddenly, an epiphany struck me. This entity, this rain, they were somehow connected to our town, to our fears and secrets. Perhaps it all began long before Abby's disappearance, long before anyone even noticed the connection between the rain and the vanishings. It was an ancient force, dark and unknown, seeping into our world through the raindrops. But there were too many thoughts, and they distracted me from escaping. At some point, I felt cold hands grab my shoulder, and in that instant, I knew my fate was sealed. I turned around and saw the blue figure before me, wrapping its coat around me, and everything around me disappeared. The world plunged into darkness. I no longer felt the rain or heard its noise. There was only a silent, inexpressible terror that flooded my consciousness. When I came to, there was nothing around me but endless, unceasing rain. I realized I had become part of this nightmare, a prisoner of the rain, and would never see a bright day again. Like Adam and all those who had vanished before us, I became a victim of the entity that roams the town during the rain, snatching those who stare too long at the raindrops, hoping to uncover their mystery. Now I know the truth, but I no longer need it. I'm nothing but a shadow, dissolved in the rain, part of the endless curtain that will continue to take people every time a downpour falls on the town.